Let's take you to the story now. Fugitives seem to be running to South Africa and continue committing crimes. Just last week, Israel's most wanted suspect was arrested in Johannesburg. The gang leader, Yaniv Ben Simon, appeared in court today. He is wanted in Israel on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. According to Israeli authorities, the suspect is part of a gang dealing in drug trafficking, extortion and other criminal activities. Some experts believe officials in the country need to beef up intelligence structures to be able to tackle such criminal syndicates. Let's discuss this further now. These crimes that are able, or criminals that are able to operate in our country. I'm now joined by organized crime investigator Chad Thomas from IRS Forensic Investigations. Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas, for your time. Of course, the first question from me is, should South Africans, already we know that we are a violent country, but now you're finding people who are wanted in other nations being arrested here, having been committing crime here, right? So it means that we're not safe. But should we be celebrating because at least the Hawks did make this arrest?
So the story's in the news for all the right reasons. Yes, it was a multidisciplinary interagency takedown. It couldn't have been done without actionable intelligence from the South African authorities together with Interpol and the Israeli authorities, driven by our local crime intelligence structures. But again, like you said, the greatest concern is South Africa isn't just being treated as a hiding place for these criminals. It would appear that they're now continuing their criminal activities whilst on South African soil. And when one sees what came out of that compound in Bryanston, of course it's very worrying. There was a canopy on a bakkie that had been converted to a sniper's nest, a canopy that had been converted into a torture chamber, a multitude of illegal weapons, and of course a large quantity of what's suspected to be drugs. So we're no longer a hiding place, we're a place to continue with criminal activity.
And we can, the list goes on, right, of the underground world. We know that we used to have, for instance, Yolali Jackson. At some point, there was also the Czech fugitive Radovan Krejcir, etc., in terms of this type of crime that Mr. Ben Simon has been accused of. Why is South Africa so susceptible to such? Why does it go unabated that people can just run here, not only to hide, like you say, but to continue with their criminal lives?
It's not a new phenomenon in South Africa. In the mid-1980s, one of the top alleged Sicilian bosses came to South Africa under assumed identity. He was then later identified as Vito Palisolo. As you mentioned, Radovan Krejcir came to South Africa under an assumed identity. He then stood against his extradition, was released on bail, and then continued with crimes in South Africa unabated. We found out that two of Arkin Slayer, and Arkin being one of the most notorious figures to come out of the Bosnia-Herzegovina war of the early 90s, two of his alleged killers surfaced in South Africa, and there are a multitude of organized crime syndicates in South Africa. Why? Well, it's due to capacity and infrastructure issues. We have incredible legislation in South Africa to fight organized crime. We have members within the law enforcement and prosecutorial structures that want to make a difference. But there's a problem when it comes to the political willpower to be able to capacitate and create sufficient infrastructure for these members within our law enforcement cluster to work and to combat what's now becoming very glaringly an international and very embarrassing problem.
So clearly then, if the politicians, or if there's no political will, then we should take it upon ourselves as citizens of South Africa to probably do something about this, because this is becoming increasingly embarrassing, knowing that such alleged criminals would be found in our country, and most of them would, you'd later find out that they've had police in their pockets as well.
The fact that we've got dedicated members, because understand a project of this magnitude could never have happened if you didn't have dedicated, uncorrupted members. And within the same week, we're getting news that two people that were involved in a crime that was committed in Ireland have also been arrested in South Africa. This could herald a change in what's happening in terms of the perception of crime in South Africa going unabated. And I do think that the committed members are coming to the fore, and we're seeing a massive change in attitude towards the prosecution of organized crime figures.
And I mean, it's so embarrassing. I mean, I remember one particular incident that we will all remember, I think, that is the Diwani trial. And at some point, the Diwani family saying that South Africa seems to be a country where, murder for hire is very cheap. You can just decide to bring someone here and you'll be able to pay someone in South Africa to get someone murdered for very cheap and then run away.
The Diwani case is a very sad case in point that you've raised, and I'll tell you why it's sad. Our National Prosecuting Authority had to prove beyond a shadow of doubt that the extradition was necessary and that there was more than enough evidence against him to encourage and enable his extradition from the United Kingdom to South Africa. It was on South African soil that that case fell flat, and we did not see justice for the Diwani family.